I went on my first snow skiing trip when I was 9 years old. I remember it well. It was an unseasonably warm winter day. Dad drove me and my brothers from our home in Chesapeake to Massanutten Ski Resort. Calling it a resort is a bit of an embellishment, but I didn't know that at the time. Anyway, I spent more time that day sliding down on my rear end than gliding gracefully with both feet underneath of me. But that day, I really fell in love with skiing. So when our kids were born, it was something that I wanted to pass on to them and make memories along the way. We skied almost every winter for a long time when my kids were growing up. And once I got introduced to real ski resorts, I just confessed to you that I became a bit of a ski snob. I was no longer willing to settle for 3-minute runs and 30-minute waits for a lift. I discovered Killington, Vermont. It was close enough to drive, but with more like 30-minute runs. It boasts the longest run in the eastern United States. It's a run called the Juggernaut. It's about 6.5 miles long. Killington has 6 mountains all connected together with miles and miles of winding trails, 21 feet of annual snowfall. And so I took my family there several times. This is just one of them, probably from 12 or 13 years ago, I don't know. And when we first went to this place, my daughter, she had already learned how to ski. But both of my boys, when we found Killington, they cut their teeth on this sport right here in Vermont. For both of them, when they were only 4 years old. And we took them to Killington, and we put them in a half a day of ski school. And when they came out just 4 hours later, they were able to stand up and they were able to ski down. But one thing they could not do was stop. Gravity was just too powerful for their little 4-year-old legs. So for the first year or two that they skied, I used this contraption called a leash. Now, this is not me. This is just somebody with some kid on a leash. But basically, the leash is a special strap that the child wears around their waist. It's got like a belt on it. And they ski in front of you, and you ski behind them, and you hold the reins. And it's a lot like riding a horse. You pull to the right if you want them to turn that way, and you pull to the left if you want them to turn that way. But the most important function of the leash is to stop them because they can't do it. And otherwise, they'll rocket to the bottom of the mountain at breakneck speeds. Your job as the leash holder is to brake for them because they can't stop. So you have to stop for them and for you at the same time. And here's the thing about a 4-year-old. They completely trust you. All you have to do is sound confident. I remember when Joshua, our youngest, first learned to ski, we picked him up at noon after 4 hours of ski school. He had just graduated. We were so proud. They practiced moving on this conveyor belt they called the magic carpet. And there was almost no slope to this thing they called a slope. It was very gentle and well-groomed. And we were just so excited as we watched him ski, our son. I could see Olympic gold medal hanging over our mantle in the future. He was smiling. We were smiling. Everybody was happy. And so I turned to Susan right there in that moment, and I said, let's go to the top of the mountain. I could see the caution in her eyes, and I could hear the fear in her voice as she tried to object, but I was having none of that. I simply held up the leash, and I said, he'll be fine. What could go wrong? A few minutes later, we were standing on top of the earth. I don't exactly know what the altitude was, but I'm pretty sure I saw the space station float by. Looking down from that mountaintop was like watching one of those National Geographic specials where some idiot chases an avalanche in slow motion and he's never seen again. And even though it was like minus 30 degrees and snowing like crazy, I was sweating like a guy watching his life flash before his eyes. And that's when I heard him. Through his fortified snowsuit and ski mask, Joshua yelled back to me, Dad, can I go? Are you with me? I got you, bud, I said. I had to swell up some confidence in my voice, tried to hide the terror underneath, and I must have done a pretty good job faking it because as soon as those words left my mouth, Joshua left the safety of our mountaintop perch, and he started his uncontrolled plummet to earth. I had no choice but to follow. I was holding the leash. wondering if I could stop myself, let alone both of us. And as we traveled, a strange thing happened. I mean, every once in a while, Joshua, who was facing forward, would yell back. He would say, "Dad, are you still there?" "I'm here, bud," I'd say. "Okay, Dad." And sometimes he would yell, "Dad, I don't know which way to go." "Just feel the tug. I'll show you which direction you need to go. I'll pull you there." And occasionally I'd have to slow him down to keep us both safe. And sometimes we'd stop and rest. And every once in a while, he'd let out a yell and hoot and holler because we were just having so much fun. And I would yell and hoot and holler with him. And once or twice he would say, "Dad, I'm scared." And I'd have to reassure him, "You don't need to be afraid, Joshua. Dad's got you." And when we got to the bottom of that very first run, I was soaking wet from head to toe. I've never worked that hard in my whole life. But Joshua was figuratively on top of the mountain. And that adventure for him only happened because he trusted me, his dad, even though Joshua didn't know where he was going or how he was going to get there. He believed that I would be the constant voice in his ear, telling him what to do and when to turn and helping him avoid danger along the way. Well, maybe you're not an avid skier, maybe you've never been, but we have all at some point in our lives felt like we were moving through our lives uncontrollably, uncertain of where to turn, unsure of how to slow down, or unsure of even if it was possible to take a break. We can probably all relate to the anxiety and the fear of not knowing exactly where we're headed. In our origin story today, we're going to get to see one of the most famous ancestors we have, and that he knew exactly how we feel sometimes. And because of that, the account of Abraham's life, especially the very first part of his life, the very earliest moments we get to meet him, well, it can have a profound influence on your life and mine. In fact, Abraham is one of the few people who get mentioned not only when we hear his origin story in the book of Genesis, the first book of the Bible, but thousands of years later in the account of Jesus' life and the early church. This is how the writer of Hebrews remembers him. Way after Jesus, he said, "By faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went," check this out, "even though he did not know where he was going." The writer of Hebrews, in this very famous chapter in the Bible, names or refers to almost 24 people, but nobody gets more attention, nobody gets more accolades than our ancestor Abraham. He becomes the founding father of 3 major world religions: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And by the time these words right here are written in Hebrews, all 3 of those religions would be growing and fighting with each other. Until Jesus came, no single person had more influence in the world and on world history than Abraham. And his entire faith journey begins with a single step. It happens in Genesis 12 when God comes to Abraham, who at the time is called Abram, and I'll use both of his names interchangeably. This is how it happens. The Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I'll make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I'll curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you." That's quite a promise. And we understand this, right? Don't we get promises of great and awesome things all the time? I mean, it happens all around us, people promising things that can't possibly happen. A multi-level marketing company has discovered a new herb that's proven to cure cancer and reverse aging and give me my hair back. Sign me up for that. Or how about the latest weight loss fad? I actually saw a headline on Google this week that said, "Lose 10 pounds in 5 seconds. Sign me up for that too. And if you're looking to become a millionaire with no risk and no credit, and even if you have no money, there are several rich gurus who can teach you how. You just have to buy their course with money you don't already have. So we're used to, you and I, we understand being pitched gimmicks and too good to be true ideas, and And because of that, we have a natural skepticism when it comes to these kinds of big promises. But God comes to Abram, and he offers him not just the deal of a lifetime, but the deal of our lifetime. It's a promise, it's a covenant that will not only be for Abraham, but for all the people of God for generations. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you, and I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I'll bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I'll curse, and all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. Now, if God offered this to you, like really, God offered this to you, wouldn't you take it? Wouldn't you say, this is a deal, sign me up? I mean, who doesn't want God to bless them? I mean, who wouldn't accept being made into a great nation? Who would turn down the divine gift of blessing those who bless you and cursing those who curse you? I mean, imagine if you had this kind of power. Next person that cuts you off in traffic, you just say, okay, dude, that's it. You're cursed. Or how about when your teenage daughter brings home her first boyfriend and you're just not ready yet? Cursed. And when you order something and you expect it to be delivered with 2-day free shipping that you paid for, and it doesn't show up, and then it gets delayed, and then it gets delayed, and then it gets delayed again, you'd curse the whole supply chain. Oh, wait, that already happened. This incredible gift from God to Abraham, making him into a great nation, making his name great, blessing and cursing. And so it's not a one-way street. It comes with a catch. I mean, it's not like God shows up and drops off some gifts and then leaves. No, Abraham has a part to play here. And his part is he has to follow God in faith. And you might say, well, Brian, I mean, for all he got out of the deal, why would he care? I mean, if God is going to give me all that, the blessing, the power to bless and curse, make great nations, make my name great, and for generations to come and all that stuff, just tell me where to go and I'll start moving. But that is the catch. God tells Abram to leave, but doesn't tell him where he's going. He has to pack up and start moving to an unknown destination. God requires Abram to follow him blindly, to trust him completely, to submit to him unconditionally. God requires Abram to follow blindly, trust completely, and submit to him unconditionally. The Lord had said to Abram, go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. Can you imagine? I mean, really, just try to live in this world for a minute, not the one we live in. I mean, this is before cell phones and FaceTime and texting and social media. There wasn't even a postal service to send letters back and forth. When Abram left his father and his people and his country, he would probably never see them again. He would probably never have any communication with them ever again. Susan and I were mapping out some of our things that we wanted and need to do in 2022, and there's this trip I've got to take, and I said to her a couple of days ago, I said, I'm going to have to cut this trip short because I just can't be away from them that long. The them I'm talking about are my granddaughters, of course. All 4 of them have jacked up my travel schedule because I just can't imagine going any real stretch of time without getting to be with them. Some of us do have to do this, though. Our families are spread out, and some of us work and live like this. But truthfully, I mean, if we're honest about this, at least the pain is eased by virtual visits through a screen and pics we share on Instagram and plane and car rides to faraway places for frequent reunions. Abraham didn't have any of those things. So God tells him, go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. And so he goes to pack, and while Abraham walked back for the last time to the only home he has ever known, he would be headed towards, he had no idea. He didn't know where he was going. I've lived in Virginia my entire life. I was born here. My dad still lives in the house that he bought when I was 2 years old. This is home to me. It's comfortable, and I like it, frankly. We've got all 4 seasons. We've got terrain from the Blue Ridge Mountains to the beautiful beaches. We've got rich soil and rich history and rich heritage, and this is home to me. I love traveling, and I've visited places all around the world, but I always want to come back here, come back home. So what happens to Abraham is something that I think about sometimes. This hypothetical scenario where I ask myself, would I be as faithful as Abram? And God comes to him in his comfortable life, his settled routines, and he says, I want you to leave all this behind for a destination I'm not yet going to tell you. Just start walking. And here's the most incredible thing. I mean, this is the critical part of our origin story. It's the part that moves this, what we're talking about today, from history to heritage and turns it into legacy. Abram does it. He actually does it. He actually follows. He grabs his wife and a few things, and he says goodbye to his father and his mom and his friends, and he leaves. So Abram went as the Lord had told him. I mean, this single action right here, it sets Abram on a path that would literally change the course of human history. All of the adventures for the rest of his life hinge on this moment right here. And it all began because God called Abram to a life of going without knowing. Truthfully, that's only half of it, you see. I mean, if I'm being honest with you, I'm going to tell you that God makes that call on many of us. This story about Abram, it isn't really written until Abram's response comes. And that's what makes this part of our epic origin story so powerful. Because God didn't just call him to go without knowing. Abram went. And this required absolute trust, and it resulted in a life that left a lasting legacy. We're still talking about him thousands of years later. Of course, God's completely worthy of the trust that Abraham placed in him. God never steered Abraham into trouble, not one time. It's not that Abraham didn't have any, but all the messes that he ever got into were messes of his own making, and they came precisely because there were some moments when he did not follow God. And still, at the most critical times, when it was really important, when it really mattered, when the pivot points came and the stakes were super high, Abram went. He went with God to the place that God would show him, but without knowing the destination. 24 years ago, I went out of the country for the very first time because I knew that God was telling me to do it. I knew that I had heard God speak. His voice was crystal clear, but from every single other angle, that trip made no sense at all. A group of people from the church I attended as a young man was going to help this church in this place called Cologne in Panama, one of the most dangerous cities. And there was a small church there, and they had a building that needed a bunch of repairs. And even though their numbers were small, they really believed God wanted them to do big things. And they found us and reached out to our church in Virginia and asked us to come and help. And I didn't want to go. It didn't make sense for me to go. A good job, I'm kind of a numbers guy. I cranked the numbers out. I mean, at the time, a really good job in Panama for a Panamanian paid them $200 a month. And unemployment was super high. It's like 40%. And there were 12 of us going on this trip, and we were each going to spend $1,200 to get there. Now, you don't have to do the math. I'll do it for you. We could have sent the money instead of going, and we could have employed 72 Panamanians for a month. And we were only going to be there for a week. It just didn't make good financial sense. Still, there were people around me who spoke passionately about it. And these were people I trusted, mentors who had nurtured me in my own faith journey, people like Mike and Ann Gafford and Wayne and Nita May. And they had more experience, and I knew that they really followed Jesus. So still in my intellect, believing that it was a poor economic decision, I went. And I had 1,000 questions I couldn't answer, but I was crystal clear on this. God wanted me to go to the place he would show me. So as I kissed my family goodbye and I boarded the plane, it was like shoving off from the top of a mountain, God holding a leash behind me. Are you still there, God? I've got you, son. You just keep going. That trip literally changed my life. And I could teach a whole series on the lessons that I learned there, but this would be at the top of the list. We never really know when we go with God. We might think we know what's going to happen, what we're going to do, who we're going to interact with, but God has a way of surprising us and teaching us and schooling us so that we know more about him and about the way he relates to people and the world, and most importantly, so that we know more about ourselves. That trip to Panama is where God wanted to talk to me about a new direction for my life, where I would become a pastor. And it's happened many times in my life since then, especially 5 years after that Panama trip, when God whispered in my ear, I want you to start a church for people like you, people who don't go to church. Talk about going without knowing. I had never started a church. I had never managed a staff. I had never had to raise money, never done 1,000 things that would be required for this endeavor. I wasn't experienced enough, and I certainly wasn't mature enough. I wasn't skilled enough. I wasn't connected enough. I wasn't resourced enough. It just made no sense, except that there was this voice that was crystal clear. So along the way of this journey of nearly 20 years, many times I would yell back, God, I don't know which way to go. Just wait for the tug, he would say. You'll know when it's time. So in what way has God been calling you? What has God been calling you to leave or go towards? I mean, it can often sound crazy, and it sometimes just makes no sense. But when God calls, he's calling you to an adventure of going without knowing, at least not knowing all of it. And you can trust him to steer you along the way. We always want the entire plan. But faith means that we trust God to navigate, even when we don't. I don't know what God is calling you to do. I don't know where he's calling you to go or what he's calling you to leave behind, but I do know this. God wants all of us to follow him in a life that is defined by one of our giant origin forefathers, because Abraham taught us about going without knowing. And that's ultimately what faith is about. Going without knowing isn't easy. Let's just admit it. And one day you're in your comfortable job, you've worked your way up to a really good position, you got good job security and a retirement package, and you can start to see retirement, maybe in the not too distant future. You finally got 4 weeks of paid vacation. You've accumulated enough sick days to be really sick. You know the history of your organization. You've got some seniority. You're known by those in the executive suite and in upper management. You like where you are. And then God comes and says, I want you to leave, and I want you to go to what you don't know. What will you do? Maybe you've lived in the same place, in the same community for a long time. You live in a comfortable house, in a comfortable neighborhood. You got friends nearby. Your family is just the right distance away, not next door, but within a reasonable drive. And your landscape's the way you like it. It's decorated the way you like it. It's arranged the way you like it. And after many years of hard work, everything is just so. And then God comes and he says, I want you to leave and go to what you don't know. What will you do? And sometimes, often, if we're honest, God's calling for us is not nearly as drastic as requiring us to quit our job or move to another country. But God's call to us is always just as profound, because it's from God, after all. You're standing on the edge of the field or the basketball court. You're watching your kid or grandkid practice or play, and you've come to recognize faces on the other side of the field and on your side of the field, faces of other parents. But today, you feel this movement inside of you to walk across the field or the court or the room and introduce yourself. You don't know what will happen, but you respond to his voice. That is going without knowing, and it's just as profound. You look at your finances, you've been careful, you've spent sparingly, you've saved well, and then you hear God to tell you to give a substantial portion of it away. Does that sound crazy? I mean, you might think, well, how am I going to retire? How am I going to be secure? How am I going to sleep at night? I don't know. But for some of us, giving away some security might be what it looks like to live a calling of going without knowing. That was certainly the case for Abraham. I don't know what God is calling you to do, but I know that you and I will never have all the details of his plan. God just doesn't operate that way. Faith doesn't operate that way. Followers of God have to trust him to speak into our lives along the journey, like a kid skiing on a leash. Our Father behind us, telling us where to turn and what to do and when to slow down and when to stop. And every once in a while, we'll yell back, "Dad, are you still there?" And he speaks, "I'm here. I got you. You just keep going." Both of my boys learned to ski when they were 4. They learned to trust their dad's voice behind them, tugging on the leash, doing for them what they could not do for themselves. All they had to do was go. And since then, well, I've had to let them go. I was there saying goodbye with all kinds of anxiety because they were about to go without me to dangerous places to help other people know about Jesus. They were without me, but they were not without a leash. I remember distinctly when the last kid, our youngest Joshua, did this for the first time. And we get to the airport, we check his bag, and I take him to security, and I make him hug me. I tell him that I love him, and he walks away. And I find a perch where I can look through the glass and watch him all the way through the checkpoints, and he takes off his shoes and his belt, and he puts his bag on the table, and he goes through the body scanner thing, and he comes out on the other side, and he grabs his bag. I watch him put his belt back on and his shoes and throw his backpack over his shoulder, and he takes a step and then stops suddenly. And he pauses and he looks back across the expanse of the security complex. His head moves from side to side. He's searching until finally his eyes catch mine. Like the decade earlier, he's still asking the same question. "Dad, are you still there? You still got me?" He sees me and waves, and I wave back, and as if to say, I'm still here, son. I've got you. And the voice inside of me yells back to my Father. "God," I say, "are you still there? You got me. You got him." And his voice, more sure than mine will ever be and stronger than I could ever imagine, whispers in my ear, "I'm still here. I've got him, and I've got you." Listen, friend. The voice of God is calling you. He has an adventure for you, and it will leave you with all kinds of unanswered questions, but it will end with you being a blessing and being blessed, just like Abraham. His origin story is our legacy. Listen for God's voice and follow. Imagine God walking behind you, whispering in your ear, "Turn here, slow down." At times, maybe at this moment right here, you yell back, "God, are you still there? You got me." Hear his voice. "I'm here. I'm always here. And yes, I've got you."
And I can hear it in the crackle of a bonfire. I can hear it in the middle of the ocean water. Oh, I can't explain it, but it makes me want to cry. And I can hear it when the rain falls on my windowsill. on a playground where children's laughter lives. Oh, I can't explain it, but it makes me wanna cry. And I can hear it in the busy New York City streets, and I can hear it in the country Georgia fields of green. Oh, I can't explain it, but it makes me wanna cry. Sounds like grandmama telling you where you come from. I said it's kinda like laughter out of the mouths of your loved ones, like catching up with an old friend, reminiscing on back when. It's like a summertime sprinkler, street side with my ice cream cone. I said it sounds like a choir singing hymns, hallelujah. It's the voice of God, yeah, and it can make a grown man cry. And I can hear it on the wind of an early morning, yeah, when the fog is getting thick and the birds are chirping. Oh, I just can't explain it, but it makes me wanna cry. And I can hear it in the hush of a midnight hour. Oh, when I'm alone in my room and I'm growing under. Oh, it's just something I can't explain, no, but it leads me to the light. It's like the sound of a newborn baby crying, or like the final breath of a loved one passing. Oh, it's a beautiful thing, yeah, 'cause it leads me to the light. It's like a drive-through movie, small town with a big screen, like grilling out in the front yard. Sometimes it's the simple things, like storytelling with my grandpa. He was so easy to believe, like when the sun comes up, yeah. Sometimes it's better when the sun comes down, 'cause there's just something about the moonlight, and it can make you feel alright. It's the voice of God, yeah, and it can make a grown man cry. Oh, yes it can, yes it can. It's the voice of God, yeah, and it can make a grown man cry.
God is not saying the same thing to all of us, but He is saying something to all of us. For us to fully live into the calling of God on our lives, we have to take a step closer towards Him. The next right step for you is different than the next right step for me and other people around us, but we all have one. We all have a next right step. Sometimes it means simply moving closer to God. If you want to know how to do that, you can reach out in the chat right now. We'd love to talk to you. We've also done a follow-up video for you that will help you discern what taking a step towards God means for you in your life right now. You can find that on our homepage or our app. Don't miss the last message in our Origin series next week. A great experience. You're not going to want to miss it. Invite a friend, and we'll see you then.